Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Blow the Fuse On Air.
We've dug around in our Blow the Fuse archives and we've come up with this film of the guest stars from early 1985.
Yes, I first started playing with the guest stars in 1981, and at the time the group were playing over in West London, a pub called the Stanhope Arms, on a Friday evening, and it really was, the name the guest stars came because it was a group that had various guest artists and musicians playing with them. And the group at the time were Ruthie Smith on the saxophone, Julia Doyle on double bass, Sue Ellery on vocals and piano, and Linda DeMango was playing drums. And then I started playing with them. Josefina Cupido came in as the drummer, and Linda moved to congas and percussion. Then Lackadaisical took over from Sue Ellery on vocals and piano. And then finally, I think in 1983, you'd done some depths, but then Alison took over as the bass player from Julia Doyle. And that lineup really was the group that did all the touring in this country and internationally for the next few years and recorded all the albums.
That's right. This is the first time we've shown this film in its complete form. We did show an excerpt of it a few years ago as part of a compilation that we did. And you'll notice in the film towards the beginning, when we arrive at the King's Head and start to unload, you'll see that there's a van load of equipment which we unloaded. It's quite impressive, a lot of very large, extremely heavy items. And we did unload these for every single gig we did. So it wasn't quite as glamorous as it looked.
Oh, the glamour. We don't actually know how this film came about. It was recorded by a women's film group, and it was recorded after we had released our first album. So that was done in September 1984. We'd been to America and had played several gigs over there, including things like the Blue Note Club in New York, and it was a fantastic tour. And then we came back to this country, and we were doing an awful lot of gigs at the time.
We were. The person, of course, who would know how the film came about would be Debbie Dickinson. She was our manager, although you'll see in the interview she actually denies that she was that, but she was our manager. And it is lovely that we've got a nice piece of interview with her in the film, because very sadly she died 2 years ago.
And we appeared to be rather tired during the interviews, not the playing, but the interviews. And I think it's because the interviews were done in the morning, which was quite early by our standards, and also because we did so many gigs at the time. We were just gigging all the time, and I think there's that sort of comes over just a little bit, I think, when we're talking.
Well, so here we are. We hope you really enjoy this film. Here it is, the guest stars live at the King's Head in Islington in London, early 1985. Now, we really hope that you enjoy the cars, or lack of, on the roads, the hair, the clothes, some of the politics, and it's really a snapshot of the guest stars in the mid-80s.
Thank you very much. When I was very small, my sister played the fiddle. And during her fiddle lessons, I used to sit under the piano with my head against a bit of wood at the bottom and really liked the sound of it. So I started to be taught when I was about 4 or 5. I suppose as long as I can remember, I was always involved in some way. So it wasn't like I made a conscious decision, right, today I'm going to go out and buy a guitar or something like that. And I remember when I was very young, I used to sort of sing a lot and things like that. And I used to have a little banjo I played a bit, not very well. And then when I was about 4 or something, when I was about 6, I managed to get some piano lessons from one who lived down the road. And I had piano lessons on and off for about 5 or 6 years, I think. But I didn't really like them very much, and I sort of missed as many as I had, you know. And then I always had, from the time I was about 9, I got an acoustic guitar for Christmas. At the time I was really into the Beatles and Paul McCartney, and I didn't realise he was a bass player, so I just said I can have a guitar, and I used to stand in front of the mirror and try and play songs. I didn't have a clue though, you know, of what the chord shapes were and everything, so I used to sort of just pose around the house. And then what happened was I just really became, I really liked pop music, and I used to listen to tape, you know, radio shows and things, and I really wanted an electric guitar so I could sort of do the sort of sounds I could hear on records. So I went out and I got one for about £14. I come from a musical family, and I kind of got plonked into having piano lessons at about the age of 5, which I hated, and I learned what guilt was about really young, because I never used to do any practice, and I used to have to go to lessons and sort of play the same old pieces without having touched them for sort of the whole week. So I did sort of start kind of being involved in music when I was quite young. When I was about 10, I started to learn to play the cello, and I've always sung. I was sort of used to sing in various choirs, and I got quite serious about classical singing. When I was, I suppose, about 15, I used to sing in choirs and oratorio groups, and, you know, sort of singing things like the Messiah and all that sort of stuff. I eventually ended up having sort of quite a dilemma about whether to be a musician at school or to kind of go into sciences, because I actually wanted to be a doctor. And I could either study music or sciences, but I couldn't do both. And because I enjoyed playing the cello and things like this, I ended up opting for music. And I then studied English as a main subject and music as a subsidiary at York. But all that time I've been involved in classical music. Dropped out really, and towards the end of college, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to be in a pop group called Expensive as one of the girl singers, sort of doing Tamla Motown stuff, and you know, just all the old standards like the Ronettes and all that sort of thing. And I hadn't sort of sung. I gave up singing at college and more or less gave up music, and so that was a good way back into it. And I kind of. That's sort of, I've been involved in that side of music ever since, really. And then in the 60s I started playing guitar and borrowing folk tunes, and I didn't really progress as far as I wanted to with guitar for some reason. But I always knew a lot of musicians and went to a lot of gigs from a very young age and got into like folk music and blues and stuff like that. And then when I moved to London, which was in about 10 years ago, 74, I moved into a house with a lot of musicians, black musicians and jazz musicians, and that's when I started really getting excited about the idea of playing music myself. I started messing around on congas because it was like a lot of Africans used to be there playing, and I either could sit and watch or make tea or join in. So I used to, thought, well, I think I better join in because I loved it.
I started when I was 19, and I was a dancer on the ships, flamenco dancer in cabaret, and from the age of 16 to 19. And during that time I sort of mixed a lot with the musicians and was quite inspired by them. And I suppose I fell in love with it really, and it was an escape, because I used to sort of fiddle about in nightclubs during the day when there wasn't anybody there on the drums. And I mean, I just picked it up.
Right.
Well, about 8 years ago, I answered an ad in the women's newsletter, which was put in by Frankie, who's a drummer. And she was advertising for women to get together and play with. And I played guitar when I was younger, but I hadn't played any music really.
Bass guitar?
No, electric guitar, you know, ordinary. And I hadn't been playing any music for quite a few years, but I really, really wanted to start playing again. And I answered the ad, and there was about 2 or 3 other women who also answered the ad. And we got together, and it was, well, it's a sort of long story, but as a result of that, we started a band, and we already had a guitarist. There was another woman who's, the point was I wasn't a very good guitarist, and I wasn't a very good singer either, so, and we didn't have a bass player, so, well, it just seemed like I had to be the bass player, really, so I had to go. But I also really wanted to. It was just have this thing that I'd like to play the bass.
Women's music, yeah. I mean, it's difficult as a woman to find out in a male world what my music is. And it's very, very difficult to develop. I'm sure there is a women's music, but how to get it, I don't know. Because, I mean, like, music today is virtually male. There's no question about that. It's male music, the rhythms. It's the way, or it's the way men have interpreted it. So at times I find it impossible to play because also, I don't know, maybe something to do with rhythm. It is very, very close to the heartbeat.
Yeah, the players that have influenced me they've all been men, because there are very few women guitarists around, and which I don't understand. I've had long talks about the guitar, and maybe it's a more male-associated instrument than other instruments. I'm not really sure, because
when kind of punk and new wave began, I thought, right, you know, loads of women sax players appeared and bass players, and I thought, right, you know, there's going to be lots more women guitarists, and there haven't really been. And when I meet a woman guitarist, it's kind of an event. We congratulate each other and talk, chat, and, you know, really for hours, because, you know, I can think of 10 women sax players living in London, and I know about, I know, 3 or 4 guitarists. You know,
Yeah.
so when sometimes occasion we dip out, it's always a problem because we've never been able to find a woman dep for me. And it's a position that's a bit weird, because in some ways I like it because I'm used to it. And I think any woman who's really honest, when you're used to being in a position like being seen as the only woman guitarist in that field, I always think, oh, it'd be really nice if there's other women around, and then part of me thinks, quite enjoy the fact that I'm sort of on my own as well.
In the first group that I was in, we were just like the girl singers. And it was as though the men were like the proper musicians and we were just like the icing on the cake kind of thing, you know. And we used to spend hours wondering what to wear, and, you know, we kind of realised that it was all wrong and that we weren't really taken seriously as musicians. And after a while, we moved to London from York, and we decided we actually wanted to take it a bit more seriously. And when the first band that I was in folded up, we kind of decided to form our own women's group and learn to play our own instruments and sort of try to kind of get it together, really. So
there was a group called Jam Today that was quite well known in the women's movement, and they were just forming a group, and by just coincidence I met the guitarist. I wasn't a feminist at the time, I didn't know anything about the women's movement. I think I was 19, and I went along to one of their rehearsals, and I thought they were really weird, but I liked them. So that's why I sort of kept going along to the rehearsals and things. And the group just kind of came together. You know, somebody who'd never played bass before took up the bass guitar, and the sax player's only been playing a few months. And we just started doing gigs, and that was the first women's band I was involved with.
My main thing about playing to mixed audiences is I'm mainly interested in playing to the women who are there. And that's not to say, I know that if men like the music, or, you know, appear to enjoy it, or come up and say things, I mean, I'm pleased. I'm not, it's not that I'm completely negative towards them, but I don't think that's not my main thing. And I mean, it varies. I can sometimes, certain mixed audiences, I can find a real trial, and it very much depends on what the men are like, because they tend to sort of dominate proceedings rather, you know.
there was a time when I thought women audiences weren't critical enough and would just they'd come along, you'd feel they'd come along and listen to you because you're women. Obviously they would, because it's a women-only gig, but that they wouldn't criticise you as much on the same criteria that they would use for other bands. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't think it's quite the same now.
I mean, like, in terms of aesthetics, I'd like to work with the most amazing musicians. There aren't that many amazing women musicians, unfortunately. A couple more years. So there is a slight problem in that, but politics are a compromise. If you're aware, you have to make compromises. And therefore, it's like it comes from a positive rather than a negative.
Women are still excited by seeing women up there playing, you know, and because it's still, I mean, okay, there are lots of women playing now, but still relatively, you know, not so many.
I work in conjunction with the guest stars. The way that I'm different from a manager is, I mean, I'm their administrator, because there's no division between the musicians and the administration. It's just like, you know, Deirdre plays her guitar and I do the administration. It's not sort of, there's not a big division there. And also, we work collectively. We have a weekly meeting and we discuss things and go from there, as opposed to sort of, and we retain control of where we gig, when we gig, why we're gigging. It's difficult because it means that you're doing it all yourself. We produced an album last July without a record label backing, which means that you're self-sponsored, self-financed, and it's a lot more work. I mean, you know, record companies have huge numbers of people working for them, and to organise the tours, to organise the promotion, to sell the album or whatever. And when you're doing that all yourself, I mean, I'm doing the work of God knows how many people in a straight setup. But what it does is it means that you can retain the control, and that's what's really important, is that you are actually marketing yourself in the way that you want to be marketed, and you can keep your integrity. And you know, I mean, there's obviously, being an all-women's band is a very gimmicky, you could go the gimmicky way, and the guest stars haven't gone that way at all, and that's a lot to do with the way that the band is actually organised.
So how did you organise the tour to America?
With great difficulty. And a lot of stubbornness, I think. Well, what I did was I went over in April with the demo tapes and the promotional material and just phoned up and contacted hundreds and hundreds of people. I had one contact in America, who's a woman who worked around the Women's Music Network over there. And we didn't slot into the Women's Music Network in America because they didn't want to take a risk with an unknown band. I got in touch with clubs and a few women who I mean, the way that America is set up is it's like what you do in New York isn't going to get any publicity in Boston. I mean, every single town that you go to, you have to view it as a new country. So I was able to sort of get a woman in each town to promote the gig, like to actually publicise it over there and get a club to book us.
How did you actually go about financing your whole tour to America? Because I imagine that it's a really expensive project.
It's incredibly expensive. I mean, it cost us, over £10,000 to go to America. And I approached every single charity and trust that I could find in this country and didn't get a penny. I approached the British Council, who are putting in millions of pounds this year to have a load of American culture come over to here, and they wouldn't give us a penny. When we were the first band, women's band or jazz band, independent jazz band, to go to America and to do this type of tour. I was told it was impossible by the MU. Everybody I spoke to told me it was actually impossible to do it. That's why people didn't go. And like, as women, you get told things are impossible often. And so we thought, well, you know, we'll find out for ourselves. Anyway, so I approached all of the financing bodies, all of the touring people, all of the charities, and I didn't get any money whatsoever. And then I met this wonderful woman who has some money. I mean, she's not fantastically wealthy, but she has some money. And she also has a bit of a panache for gambling on the cricket. And it so happened that this year we had, I think it was the Australian and Indian West Indies series. Anyway, she put a most unlikely bet on it, which was that the 5 matches, I don't know that much about cricket, but the 5 matches were all going to be won by the West Indies. There weren't going to be any draws. And I mean, this hasn't happened for years and years and years and years. So, and she won something like £5,000, which is basically what she put into the guest stars going to America as just, I mean, it wasn't a loan because she knew we couldn't possibly pay her back, And then I also approached Virgin Atlantic Airways to see if they would be interested in us singing on the aeroplane or playing on the aeroplane in exchange for the airfares. And so we went down and did this audition, and they had to drop their instruments and just do an a cappella set on the aeroplane. So that's what they did in exchange for the airfares there and back.
Very, very hard to find. I could never get to love. And to love, very, very hard to find. Never get to love. And to love, very, very help me sing. Never to love. To love is very, very hard to find. To love, to love is very, very hard to find. To love is very, very hard to find. To love is very, very hard to find.
What do you think the guest stars are going to go in the future then? What are the plans to, you know, sort of the strategy or whatever to carry on? Or is there...
Well, we're in the process of developing a strategy. I mean, it's difficult because the guest stars have put in an enormous amount of work, and I mean, it is hard doing it yourself, and it's like the reasons why you're doing it yourself are very, very important, and it's very important that musicians like the guest stars are more and more visible. You know, obviously because of the impact it has on other women coming along and seeing them doing it, and women who are wanting to play themselves, and that whole visibility around women is significant. But there comes a point when you are tired, and I think that, I mean, we're planning to do another album this year and continuing touring. I mean, like, I really want to build up resources that are available for other women musicians as well, because the guest stars have opened up a lot of new ground and have a lot of information and a lot of resources that would be very useful. But as far as the actual sort of future of the band is concerned, I couldn't really say, you know. I mean, we need to discuss that and work out where we are going to go from here, because to carry on in the same vein with the same amount of work is somewhat difficult, and it doesn't get any easier. It seems to get harder, which is interesting. I don't fully understand why that is.
The problems came, how they went. Could they all be the same? But you never know how your life will work out. Nothing now will surprise me. Keep on trying, keep believing. When you want on and I'm so glad I found a friend in you. I'm so glad I found a friend in you. Summertime rain, don't
Well, what an amazing film that was.
Yes, it was. We have only just recently seen that film ourselves, and I found it quite interesting, if slightly confronting, seeing myself 35 years ago. Partly, when you see something like that, you think, oh, I'm sort of the same person as I always was. I am the same. And yet I can see things that were terribly different, and I realise that I feel very different as well, which is probably a very good thing, and it shows that I've grown a little bit, perhaps.
Yeah, I know. Well, you recognise some of the. I mean, when I see myself talking and I see myself playing, I know that. Well, of course, I am that person, but I'm also not that person, just as you say. And the Guest Stars was such an amazing group. I mean, we talked about the fact that we did an awful lot of touring. I mean, for me, it was through music. It was the first time I really did any travelling, and we had so many conversations in our van. I think I really felt like it was the University of Life and Art, we used to call it.
No, it was. And I think also because it was everything was mixed up together. We listened to a lot of music. We learned musically from each other because of all the different influences that people brought in musically. So we learned from those. And travelling was extraordinary. We did go to the most amazing places. We actually did a tour of the Middle East in 85 or 86, which was extraordinary. And lots of tours in Europe and America and all over the place. It was amazing.
Well, when we did 6 nights in Baghdad when Saddam Hussein was in power then. Just extraordinary. And we also did things like just after Chernobyl, we toured in East Germany for 3 weeks.
We did.
Yeah.
Played in an old opera house in Egypt. All kinds of... And the Blue Note Club in New York. And really an extraordinary mixture. We played at Ronnie Scott's, I think, in 1986.
I think 85, I'm not sure, but we were the first British band to headline. People often say, oh, you're the first women's British band. No, we were the first British band to headline. We did a double.
Yeah, because the British bands were always the support acts before, and it was always the American bands.
Yeah.
So lots of extraordinary experiences. And actually, despite the fact that Debbie said in the interview she looked very doubtful about whether we could continue. That was interesting to see, that in early 1985, obviously we were maybe feeling a little bit exhausted, but we actually went on to do another 3 years of touring. We recorded 2 more albums, including the last one, which was recorded live in Berlin, and we did loads of major festivals, did some TV, radio appearances, all of that sort of thing.
And also, it's so sad that that Debbie died. I mean, we all were very, obviously, it was a terrible shock. But we're all still in touch. All the other women you see in the film, who were the guest stars at that time, we're still all in touch. We've been Zooming. And actually, we did a reunion gig. It was, I can't believe it's only just over a year ago, in November 2019, as part of a big Blow the Fuse 30 years celebration. The guest stars got together again and played at the King's Place as part of the London Jazz Festival. So
that will probably be I reckon that'll be our final reunion probably. But we'll still keep in touch.
And long may the legacy of the guest stars last.
You're right.
Thank you very much for listening, and we hope to see you again for another Blow the Fuse on Air.